Hey everybody, this is JR from West Virginia and Commonplace, and I am here to tell you about Anchor Nebula and their Go Anywhere series of projectors. They are some of the best projectors you can use when you're on the go, going camping, just even around the house. And these models include the Capsule 2, the Capsule 3 laser, and the brand new Mars 3. So definitely take time to go out and grab one of these projectors, and you will be immersed in an experience that you're not going to get anywhere else. Remember, Anchor Nebula is the way to go.
WV Uncommon Place. This podcast is a variety podcast that houses numerous series to cover mental health, empowerment, podcast framework, and various intimate theories to get to know the hosts. Along with occasional movies reviews and dives in pop culture with our event podcast episodes. The Uncommon Place digs into bringing guests on that stories don't fit the mold and are very different. WV stands for the great state of West Virginia, and every quarter we cover something in West Virginia. Stacey and myself, JR, are your hosts, so please come along for this venture to our Uncommon Place.
Welcome to West Virginia and Commonplace. I'm your host, JR. Today we're diving into another fascinating story, one of gaming's most iconic consoles, the Sega Genesis. So look, join me as we explore the rise and eventual fall of this gaming powerhouse that left a crazy mark on the industry, and it set the tone for my competitive gaming, because I had to learn how to play Street Fighter on that and play it on a Nintendo. So let's jump into this. To understand the Sega Genesis, we need to go back to the early 80s when Sega first entered the gaming scene. We'll explore the company's origins, its rivalry with Nintendo, and how Sega carved its own path by introducing the Sega Master System. Although it faced fierce competition from the NES or the Nintendo Entertainment System, Sega laid the groundwork for what was to come. Now let's roll over to 1988. That's the release of Sega Genesis. It was a game changer. We'll discuss basically its innovative hardware, including its 16-bit processor, its iconic blast processing. We'll also highlight the Genesis marketing strategy, its edgy Sega doesn't want Nintendo don't campaign, and the introduction of Sonic the Hedgehog, and that's Sega's beloved mascot who became a symbol of speed and attitude. The hard battle between Sega and Nintendo reaches peak during the 90s, known as the Console War. And the Console War, it was really entrenched. I mean, there were exclusives even going to Blockbuster, blah, blah, blah. Now, Genesis had a strong lineup, Phantasy Star, Shining Force, Streets of Rage. And then, at a later point, the competition got really tough because Nintendo introduced the Super Nintendo, or the Super NES. And the strategies employed by both companies were wild, how they try to win us over with games. The big draw was Mortal Kombat didn't have blood on the Super Nintendo. And on the Genesis, it had blood. So everybody and their mama, jumped on it on there. And the only thing that was kind of crazy is Street Fighter came out. It was a championship edition. And to alternate your buttons, you had to hit the start button real fast to change your buttons on the Sega Genesis. That was the only thing that kind of drew me off. And Capcom's lackluster support for Mega Man games. I think they got Wally Wars, but outside of that, they didn't get any of the X's and stuff like that. And here we go. This is where Sega started fumbling the bag and eventually declined. Their decision to release numerous add-ons, such as this CD, the 32X, which ultimately fragmented the market. We'll also discuss the impact of the industry shifting for the arrival of the PlayStation and Sega's ill-fated Sega Saturn console, which further strained the company's resources. But let's dig into the Sega CD. So they released the Sega CD and released the same exact games on the Genesis and on the Sega CD. They released some different ones that were more full motion video and stuff with that. Then they brought out the 32X, and the 32X, even to this day, perplexes me that they even decided to even bring it out, because you're building the Sega Saturn, but you got the 32X, so why would you even do the 32X? But that's Sega being Sega, and when you do that kind of stuff, you fragment the market, because Sega CD came out, then the 32X, and you had to be real compelled about this or that with a Sega. us people over there with the Super Nintendos, myself, I just played my Super Nintendo. I knew that the Sega Saturn was coming. It was something that was announced in Electronic Gaming Monthly. I think it was called Uranus at that time. So it had a whole different deal going and other stuff like that. So with that being said, that's how Sega pretty much started to fall. Now, you can listen to other episodes to hear about Sega Saturn and how it was overtaken by the Sony PlayStation. And although the Genesis faded from the console market, its legacy and its impact continue to resonate. The lasting effect of the Genesis is basically this. Its pioneer focus on sports games and multiplayer experiences are what made their classic titles amazing. Because I will say that sports games were way better on the Genesis. All the way to primetime football, to Joe Montana's football. Even the Maddens on there played different. It was just they had a little sleekness to them. And the thing about the Genesis that has to be remembered is Sonic. When Sonic came out, Sonic paved a way that was just insane. It moved different. And it was other exclusive things like the X-Men games and the Spider-Man games that came out that were developed by Sega with the license to these games. Instead of having Capcom or these other companies build these games, the X-Men games that were across the Genesis and the Game Gear were ridiculous. In how much they were so much like the comics and stuff like that. So Sega was definitely ahead of the time with what they were doing. I just always think in my heart that Sega just, whoever was running the US to the Japanese to the European portions, they were not in sync and they weren't thinking. Another technical feat was Virtual Fighter 2 on the Genesis, which is crazy looking if you ever get a chance to see it. And they even came out with a portable Genesis, the Sega Nomad. So that just lined you up that Sega had a lot of creative ideas for the Genesis, but they implemented things way too long and crazy, and to the point where you just kind of were like, do I really want to spend this money? And in my case, my mother made the decision for me, and we stuck with the Super Nintendo through the 16-bit era. Then I got a Sega Saturn, and then the rest of it is history. You can listen to the rest of the shows and find that out. So once again, this is JR from West Virginia and Commonplace, and we will be diving more into nostalgia on other things, but this actually concludes the third portion of the rise and fall, and this one is the rise and fall of Sega Genesis. We will conclude the series with the rise and fall of actual Sega. Thank you.
Hey Capshovians, mark your calendars for January 23rd and 24th as we bring you the first ever Capshovians Live in Orlando. We are bringing together a dozen expert speakers to dive deep into the one, yes, just one, key strategy you need to scale your marketing and your business in 2024. You get an exclusive peek into the future of the Capsho software and connect with leading industry figures. Whether you're looking to network with fellow entrepreneurs, learn from top-notch experts, or just want a memorable experience, this is the place to be. We are keeping this event intentionally intimate so that you're not just another face in a crowded room. Yes, we want to get to know each and every one of you, so spots are very limited, which means you're going to need to grab your ticket now. Go to www.capshovianslive.com and get in on the early bird pricing before it goes up. That's www.capshovianslive.com, and let's take on 2024 together.
Please follow WV Uncommonplace on Instagram, Tumblr, Twitter, TikTok, where we have some great content, Facebook, LinkedIn. Hit up the merch store at onecommonplace.square.site. Join the email list from the website, and rate, subscribe, and give feedback from your favorite podcatcher. And lastly, thanks for listening, and tune into the next episode.